In a world where everything seems to fall apart, one man's blindness will lead to the most extraordinary mission of his son's life. Tobit was once a man of sight, strength, and purpose, a father and a protector. Now he gropes in the dark, alone in a world that feels increasingly distant from the values he once held so close. Yet, through the darkness, a divine plan is set in motion, one that will not only change the course of his life but will shape the destiny of his son. What seemed like a simple family mission is about to unravel something far greater than anyone could have imagined. A journey of faith, of love, and of unexpected miracles is about to begin. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more inspiring tales from the Bible. Tobit had always been a man of principle, even when the odds were stacked against him. He had been exiled from his homeland, carried away in the Assyrian captivity to the city of Nineveh. Most of his fellow exiles had forgotten the ways of the Lord, but not Tobit. He stood firm in his faith, even when it would have been easier to blend into the shadows. His days were spent doing what was right, even when it wasn't popular, even when it put him in danger. Tobit didn't just pray. He didn't just keep the commandments. He went beyond that. His heart was open, generous, and willing to risk everything for others. In a city where the streets were filled with decay, where the forgotten souls of the poor were left to rot, Tobit risked his life to offer them the dignity of a proper burial. He couldn't bear to see his brothers, those who had no one to care for them, left abandoned on the streets like animals. And so, he gave them a proper burial, even when it meant defying the king's orders. He did not do this for recognition or glory. He did it because it was right. It was in his heart. His faith wasn't just something he spoke about, it was something he lived even when it cost him. But even the most faithful are not immune to suffering. One night, after burying a dead man who had no family to speak of, Tobit lay down in the open air, exhausted from the day's labor. A bird's excrement fell into his eyes as he slept, and over the following days his vision began to fade. The doctors consulted could offer no solution. His sight was lost forever. A man who had once seen clearly now stumbled through the world in utter darkness. This sudden, irreversible blindness was not just a physical affliction. It was a spiritual and emotional blow. Tobit had spent his life giving to others, serving with courage and conviction. And now, here he was, completely dependent on the very people he had spent his life helping. His wife Anna and his neighbors had to care for him, and though they did so out of love, it was clear how much this tore at Tobit's soul. He had been the giver, the one who helped others, and now he was the one in need. The despair grew as his vision dimmed. At night he would lie awake thinking of all the things he could no longer do. His heart grew heavy, burdened with a sense of hopelessness. What was the point of all the good he had done if it was to end like this? In his pain he prayed to God, asking to be released from his suffering. "God, why have you forsaken me?" he asked in his heart. "I have done what is right. I have followed your commandments. And yet, this is my reward." But even in his despair, Tobit did not curse God. He did not abandon his faith. He simply asked for the pain to end, to be taken from this world. It was a prayer from the depths of his soul, raw and honest but still filled with reverence. Meanwhile, his son, Tobias, grew up in this environment. Tobias had witnessed his father's acts of kindness, bravery, and unwavering faith. But he had also seen the toll that suffering had taken on Tobit, his once strong father now weakened by blindness and grief. Tobias knew his father's faith was not just something to be admired, it was something to be carried on. Tobit, aware that his time was growing short, called his son to his side. He had something important to entrust to him. "My son," he said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment, "I have saved a sum of silver with a relative in Media. It is meant for times of need. Now that time has come." With a heavy heart, Tobit explained that he could no longer undertake the journey himself. The road to Media was long and dangerous, and Tobit's blindness made it impossible. So he entrusted the mission to Tobias. "You must go and retrieve the silver from Gabriel, my relative," Tobit instructed. "It will not be an easy journey. But you are strong and you have the heart of a servant. I trust you." Tobias listened carefully, understanding the importance of the mission. He had never undertaken such a journey, but he was ready. Ready to do what his father could no longer do. Ready to bring back what his family needed. As Tobias prepared to leave, Tobit gave one final piece of advice. "Do not go alone, my son. Take a trusted companion with you. A guide who knows the way." And so, Tobias set off on a journey that would forever change his life. A journey of faith, of challenges, of growth. A journey that, though simple in its outward purpose, would reveal something far greater than anyone could have anticipated. The road ahead was long and filled with dangers. But Tobias was not alone. He carried with him the legacy of his father's faith, and with him walked a companion, one who would guide him not just through the wilderness but through the unknown challenges that lay ahead. And following quietly behind was another companion, a dog, silent, loyal, and steadfast, who would walk with Tobias every step of the way. Tobit's desperation grew with each passing day. The blindness that had stolen his independence also began to gnaw away at his spirit. His pain was not just physical but emotional. The man who had once been strong, self-sufficient, and a provider for his family, now had to rely on his wife Anna, for even the simplest tasks. The weight of this reversal hung heavy on their household. Anna, though ever faithful and supportive, felt the strain of their new reality. The emotional toll was taking a toll on her too. She had become the breadwinner, the caretaker, and the emotional anchor in their home. She worked tirelessly to keep things together, but the loss of her husband's strength, combined with the burden of worry for Tobias, was beginning to fray the edges of their relationship. One evening, as Tobias prepared for the journey his father had entrusted him with, Tobit and Anna had a brief but sharp argument. "Anna, you don't understand," Tobit said, frustration and pain evident in his voice. "I cannot go on like this. I cannot be the man I was." Anna, though weary, responded firmly, "You are still my husband, Tobit. I still see the man you were, the man you are. But you have to trust Tobias now. He will do this for you, for us." The tension in the air was thick as their voices rose. Tobias, standing quietly at the door, watched as the pain between his parents deepened. But he understood he had to leave. For his father, for his mother, and for the sake of their future. The argument didn't last long, but it was enough to add another layer of tension to the mission that was already fraught with uncertainty. Tobias, feeling the weight of his father's hope and his mother's worry, knew the journey ahead would not just be a physical one, but a journey of responsibility and emotional growth. He couldn't fail them. Not now. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast, Tobias stood in front of his father. Tobit, weak and blind, handed him a small leather pouch. Inside was the silver that would secure their future, but also the beginning of Tobias's own path. He gripped it tightly, nodding to his father as their eyes met one final time. "Remember, son," Tobit said in a voice tinged with both sorrow and hope. "The road to Media is long and dangerous. Be cautious. Take only the most trustworthy companion with you. Trust your instincts and trust in God's guidance." With a final embrace, Tobias left. His heart was full of determination, but also full of the love and responsibility that came with the mission. His mother kissed him goodbye, her eyes filled with worry. The weight of their goodbye hung in the air, but Tobias knew this was the only way to restore their family's honor and hope. As Tobias stepped out into the open air, the world before him seemed vast and uncertain. The journey ahead was long, and he would be traveling to a distant land, one full of unknowns and dangers. The road seemed to stretch endlessly before him, but he took a deep breath, setting his sights on what lay ahead. Then he noticed someone, or rather, something. A young man standing just off the path watching him. He was tall, calm, with an air of serenity that seemed almost out of place for a stranger about to embark on a long journey. His eyes were peaceful, unhurried, yet full of quiet wisdom. "I'm Azarias," the man said softly, his voice as calm as the still waters of a river. "I know the way to Media. Your father entrusted you to me. I will guide you." Tobias studied him carefully, sensing something different in this man. There was an odd stillness about him, as if Azarias had seen more than he let on. Something in his presence gave Tobias a strange sense of comfort, as if he had met him before in another life perhaps. Azarias's demeanor was unwavering, unhurried, as though he had walked this path countless times. Tobias, despite the uncertainty that gripped him, felt a deep, unspoken trust in this guide. Arias smiled gently. "The road to Media is not one for the faint of heart, but we will get there. And we'll do it together." Tobias nodded, the burden of uncertainty lifting slightly. He knew now that he wasn't alone on this journey. But there was another companion, one who had been silently waiting for Tobias to begin. As the two men began to walk, Tobias's eyes caught the movement behind him. His faithful dog had followed him out of the house, just as silently as it always did. The dog had been a constant presence in their home, never asking for attention, always loyal, always there. The dog now walked beside Tobias, its quiet steps in sync with his. The dog had not been invited, but it had followed anyway. Tobias paused for a moment, watching the animal as it trailed behind them, eyes alert, moving with purpose. It was as though the dog knew this journey was important. It did not bark, did not seek attention, but simply walked, steadfast, reliable, as though it had its own role to play in the mission. The dog's quiet loyalty became a steady reminder to Tobias of the unseen presence that walked with them. It was the same quiet loyalty that had seen his father through all the trials of his life. And now it walked beside him, his companion, his protector. With the dog at his side and Azara's ahead, Tobias felt a surge of courage. The road before him was uncertain, but in that moment, Tobias knew that he was not walking it alone. As they journeyed forward, the dog remained just behind them, keeping pace, and Tobias couldn't help but feel that the animal was a silent witness to this unfolding journey. Its calm, unwavering presence served as a reminder that God's protection sometimes comes in the most unexpected forms, quiet, humble, and ever-present. Together, the trio set off, the road ahead long and full of uncertainty, but Tobias had faith that, with these companions by his side, he would find the strength to continue. The journey had begun, and as they moved further from Nineveh, the landscape began to shift. The roads became more rugged, the weather more unpredictable, and the wild, untamed land around them seemed to press in with a constant sense of challenge. The air was thick with tension, both from the weight of the mission and the growing dangers of the journey. Every step felt more uncertain than the last. As the trio continued their path, Tobias could feel the gravity of what he was undertaking. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the importance of this mission. He was carrying not just silver but the hope of his family, his father's final wishes, the lifeline that could restore some sense of peace to their fractured lives. The dog, ever vigilant, walked beside him without a sound. Its presence, though silent, grew more significant with each passing day. Tobias had come to notice the animal's subtle actions, how it sniffed the air, how its ears would twitch at the faintest sound. There were moments when Tobias would hear nothing, but the dog would stop, head tilting, eyes alert, then continue its pace, never faltering. At one point, when the path had narrowed between two steep cliffs, the dog suddenly barked, a sharp, urgent sound that broke the silence of the landscape. Tobias froze, looking around but saw nothing. His heart raced. Azara's, who had walked ahead with his usual calm composure, didn't seem alarmed. Instead, he stopped and turned to Tobias, his face serene. "Danger is close," Azara said simply. "We must keep moving, but we must stay alert." The dog's bark had been a warning that had come too early for Tobias to notice. The dog had sensed something he couldn't see, something in the air, in the earth, perhaps in the quiet hum of the world that Tobias was unaware of. The animal's role was clear, to be the silent protector, offering warning and guidance when the path grew treacherous. The journey was testing Tobias in more ways than one. He had come seeking silver, but as the days passed, he realized that the journey was not just about retrieving material wealth, it was about something deeper. It was about his own growth, his understanding of the world around him, and his place in it. His thoughts turned often to his father, to the man who had raised him with such strength and faith, now lying blind and vulnerable at home. Each night, as they camped under the stars, Tobias would reflect on Tobit's life, the sacrifices his father had made, the courage he had shown. And now, Tobias was beginning to feel the weight of that same courage inside himself. The pain of his father's condition, the pressure of fulfilling his father's mission, the fear of the unknown, each of these emotions tugged at his heart, but with each passing day, Tobias felt a shift within himself. The weight of responsibility began to feel less like a burden and more like a calling. He was becoming the man his father had always hoped he would be. As the journey stretched on, the road became increasingly difficult, and Tobias began to feel the depth of his own transformation. His faith, once inherited, was now becoming something he owned. He no longer simply followed in his father's footsteps. He was learning to walk his own path. One evening, as the group sat around the fire, Tobias turned to Azara's, the guide who had so quietly accompanied him through each trial. They had talked little, but Tobias had come to trust this man. His calm demeanor, his knowledge of the land, his quiet wisdom. But something about Azara's remained mysterious, and Tobias, feeling a surge of curiosity, finally asked the question that had been lingering in his mind for days. "How do you know the road so well?" Tobias asked. "You seem to know everything, every turn, every danger. It's almost as if you've traveled this path before many times." Azara's gaze softened, but his expression remained unchanged. He leaned back slightly, staring into the flickering flames. "I was sent to guide you," Azara said, his voice carrying a weight that Tobias couldn't quite place. It wasn't just an answer, it was a statement. A truth that carried with it a deeper meaning, one that Tobias felt but couldn't fully understand. Tobias sat in silence, pondering the cryptic answer. It was as though Azara's had answered the question, but at the same time had only raised more. Sent to guide me? Tobias thought. Sent by whom? How could this man know so much about the journey ahead? How could he be so calm in the face of all that was unknown? Tobias felt a shiver of something deep within him, something both unsettling and comforting at the same time. The more Tobias thought about it, the more he began to understand that this journey was not just about finding a treasure, it was about discovering something far more valuable. And Azara's, with his strange calmness and quiet wisdom, was a key part of that discovery. The dog, as always, remained by their side, ever vigilant. As Tobias's mind raced with questions, the dog lay quietly at his feet, eyes wide open, sensing everything Tobias couldn't yet see. As night fell and the camp settled, Tobias felt a sense of peace, as if he were being watched over by something greater. The quiet companionship of Azara's and the dog offered him a reassurance that, though the road ahead was uncertain, he was not walking it alone. If this story resonates with you, drop a like, share it with your friends, and comment what you think will happen next. What do you believe is truly guiding Tobias on his journey? Let us know in the comments below. The journey had grown more arduous with each passing day, and the landscape around them had changed once again. The heat of the midday sun beat down on the travelers as they approached the Tigris River. The sound of the rushing water was a welcome relief after days of dry, dusty roads. Tobias, exhausted and weary from the long trek, decided it was time to refresh himself. The river beckoned, and he made his way to its edge, eager to wash away the dust of the journey and cool his tired body. The water was cool and inviting, and as Tobias waded in, he felt the tension in his muscles begin to release. The weight of the journey, the uncertainty of the road ahead, and the pressure of his father's mission seemed to ease with every step into the river. For a brief moment, Tobias allowed himself to relax, letting the coolness of the water wash over him. But just as he was beginning to let his guard down, something moved beneath the surface. Tobias felt the water stir, a sudden force pulling at his legs. He looked down, startled, just as a massive fish emerged from the depths, its jaws snapping violently at his legs. The water exploded around him as the creature latched onto his foot, pulling him deeper into the river's current. Tobias gasped, his heart racing. He struggled against the fish's powerful grip, thrashing in the water as it tried to drag him under. For a moment all he could do was fight, his hands grasping at the fish, trying to free himself. The creature was strong, its scales rough against his skin, and Tobias found himself losing his footing in the slippery riverbed. Then, amidst the chaos, the dog barked, sharp, urgent barks that cut through the air like a warning. The sound broke the silence of the riverbank, snapping Tobias out of his panic-stricken daze. His eyes darted toward the shore, and he saw the dog standing at the water's edge, barking furiously, its body rigid with alertness. Tobias's instincts kicked in. With one final burst of strength, he wrestled the fish toward the shore, pulling it out of the water and onto the riverbank. The creature thrashed and writhed in his grip, but Tobias, breathless and exhausted, held on. Finally, with a gasp, he managed to pin the fish down, its body heavy and slick against the ground. The dog's barking continued, though now it seemed to grow quieter, as if sensing that the danger had passed. Tobias, still shaken, stood over the fish, his chest heaving. He glanced back at the dog, who stood watching intently, its gaze unwavering. Azara's, who had been watching the entire scene from the shore with his usual calm demeanor, walked toward Tobias. His voice was steady, even as he looked at the fish Tobias had subdued. "Take the heart, liver and gallbladder of the fish," Azara's instructed, his words measured and deliberate. "These parts have healing properties. You will not understand their purpose now, but you will in time." Tobias, still catching his breath, nodded but didn't fully comprehend. "The fish? What for?" he asked, his mind racing with questions. Azara's eyes, calm and wise, met Tobias's with a quiet certainty. "You will need them for what lies ahead. Trust me." Tobias hesitated for a moment, still not understanding the full significance of what Azara's was asking, but his trust in the guide was growing stronger with each passing day. He carefully cut the fish open, removing the heart, liver and gallbladder as Azara's had instructed, placing them carefully in a small pouch. The rest of the fish, now lifeless, was left behind, discarded at the edge of the river. The dog remained close, watching the entire scene with unwavering focus. Though it did not approach, Tobias noticed the dog's attention never wavered. It stayed alert, its eyes locked on the fish as if sensing that something important had just occurred. As Tobias finished his task and stood up, he couldn't help but wonder about the dog's strange presence. It had barked loudly during the attack, breaking the silence of the moment. But there was more to it than that. The dog had seemed to understand the danger before he had, alerting him to the threat in a way that was almost supernatural. The dog had been there when Tobias had needed it most. It had not been a protector in the traditional sense, but it had guided Tobias through its own unique way, quiet, constant, and ever watchful. Tobias could not explain it, but he knew one thing. The dog was more than just a companion. It was part of something bigger, a silent witness to the unfolding divine plan. With the fish's organs secured and the danger past, Azarias turned and began walking further along the riverbank. Tobias, his mind still racing with questions, followed silently. The dog as always was there, its quiet steps matching their own. The group continued their journey with the dog walking beside Tobias. In the stillness of the landscape, Tobias felt a growing sense of spiritual awareness. His thoughts were less focused on the dangers of the road and more on the strange, invisible force guiding him. His father's mission was no longer just a task, it was a path that was unfolding with divine guidance. As the day drew to a close and the sky turned dark with the promise of night, Tobias sat quietly by the campfire. The dog lay at his feet, its body relaxed but its eyes still vigilant. Tobias watched the flames flicker, lost in thought. He had always believed in the power of God's guidance, but now he felt it more deeply than ever before. It wasn't just a belief, it was a presence, a force that was guiding every step of his journey. The dog's role in that journey, though silent, was becoming more and more apparent. It wasn't just an animal following along, it was part of the divine plan, serving a purpose Tobias could not yet fully understand. And so, with the dog at his side, Tobias prepared for whatever came next, knowing that the road ahead was still long and fraught with challenges, but also knowing he was not walking it alone. The journey had been long, but they had finally arrived. The city of Ekbatana lay ahead, nestled in the distance like a promise of relief. Tobias, weary but filled with determination, looked at Azarias, who had been by his side throughout the difficult journey. The dog, ever faithful, trotted beside them, its silent presence a constant reminder of the unseen forces at work. As they entered the city, they were met with the warm embrace of Raphael, Tobias's distant relative. He welcomed them into his home with open arms, and soon the house was filled with the scent of a hearty meal. But there was a shadow in the air, an unspoken sadness that lingered in the family's eyes. Tobias, though exhausted, noticed it immediately. It was then that Raphael's wife Edna revealed the source of the sorrow. Sarah, their daughter, had been married 7 times before. Each of her husbands had mysteriously died on their wedding night, victims of an evil spirit that tormented her. The house, once filled with joy, had been overshadowed by this terrible curse, and no one dared speak of it openly. Sarah, beautiful and kind, had carried this burden alone, hiding her pain behind a veil of silence. Tobias, though shocked by the revelation, felt a deep stirring in his heart. He knew somehow that his mission was not just about retrieving silver, it was about something far greater. With the guidance of Azarias, Tobias prepared for the wedding night, knowing that he had a role to play in healing Sarah from her torment. As the evening came, Tobias, filled with both fear and hope, entered the bridal chamber with Sarah. He followed Azarias's instructions carefully, burned the heart and liver of the fish they had caught earlier. The smoke filled the room, and Tobias's heart raced as he whispered a prayer, asking for God's mercy and intervention. The room grew still, and for the first time in many years, Sarah was free from the evil spirit's torment. She smiled, her face lighting up with a joy that had long been absent. The curse was broken, and the house that had been haunted by sadness now overflowed with hope. Tobias's heart swelled with relief and gratitude, but there was still a quiet, unspoken truth that lay between them. The miracle was complete, but their journey was not yet over. As the days passed, Tobias and Sarah's bond grew stronger. They celebrated, but the return journey loomed ahead. The silver had been retrieved, the curse had been broken, and the mission was now fulfilled. But Tobias's thoughts constantly turned to his father. The man who had sent him on this journey, who had entrusted him with such a vital task, was still waiting in Nineveh. He longed to see his father restored, to bring him the good news and the cure that had been promised. So, with Sarah by his side and Azarias walking ahead with his usual calm demeanor, Tobias prepared to head home. The dog, as ever, remained by Tobias's side, walking in silence, its presence unwavering. The journey back was filled with a deep sense of peace. The trials and struggles of the road had shaped Tobias into someone stronger, someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the value of faith. As they approached Nineveh, Tobias felt a surge of excitement and trepidation. His father, Tobit, was waiting. When they reached the city, the familiar streets seemed different somehow. Tobias's heart pounded in his chest as he moved through the city with Sarah at his side. The dog, ever alert, led the way as they made their way to Tobit's home. As soon as Tobias entered the door, his mother, Anna, rushed to him, her face lighting up with tears of joy. She had recognized the dog's bark, and her heart knew that her son had returned. But there was no time for celebration yet. The moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. Tobit, still blind, sat by the door. He had heard the sound of his son's return, but his vision had not yet been restored. Tobias knelt beside him and gently took the gallbladder from the fish they had caught earlier, as Azariah had instructed. With trembling hands he applied it to his father's eyes. The healing power of the fish's organs, a divine gift, worked almost instantly. Tobit's vision began to clear, and the first thing he saw was the face of his son. Tobit's eyes filled with tears, not just of joy but of awe. The man who had suffered for so long, who had prayed for death in his pain, was now healed, his sight restored by the grace of God. His family gathered around him and they wept with joy. The house, once filled with sorrow, was now filled with light and love. But the miracles did not end there. Azariah, who had quietly stood by watching the reunion, now stepped forward. His calm demeanor remained unchanged, but his words carried a weight that stunned everyone in the room. "I am not who you think I am," Azariah said, his voice filled with divine authority. "I am Raphael, the angel of the Lord, sent to guide and protect you." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Tobias, his family, and even the dog, who had been present through every step of the journey, fell to their knees in awe. The truth of their journey, of divine intervention, of angels working behind the scenes, was now laid bare before them. Tobias's heart swelled with reverence and gratitude. Raphael, in his calm and reassuring manner, instructed them to give praise to God, for it was His will that had guided them all along. With a final word of blessing, the angel disappeared, leaving Tobias, Tobit, Anna, and Sarah in a silence filled with awe and wonder. As the family sat together, filled with joy and gratitude, the dog remained, sitting quietly by Tobias's side. It had never spoken, never asked for recognition, but it had been there through every moment of the journey. It had watched over Tobias, offered silent protection, and played its role in the divine plan without ever needing to be seen. The dog's presence, though simple, was a profound reminder of the loyalty and faithfulness that God requires of all His servants. Even in the silent, unspoken moments, God's presence is felt. The dog had been with Tobias every step of the way, through the trials, the struggles, and the miracles. And in the end, it was that quiet, steadfast loyalty that had carried the family through their darkest moments and into the light of divine victory. If you found strength in this story, hit that like button, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories of faith and divine intervention. Together, we'll explore more stories of God's miracles and the power of His presence in our lives. The dog's presence in the story is more than just a companion. It symbolizes quiet loyalty, spiritual sensitivity, and faithful service. It teaches us that even in the silent moments, when we feel unseen or insignificant, God's presence is always with us, guiding us toward our purpose. Just as Tobias's dog walked with him every step of the way, we too are called to walk faithfully, trusting that God is with us, even when we don't see Him.